Unicorns and glitter and taxidermy critters are just some of the things they like. They also enjoy 80s hair bands, Grizzly Adams and John Goodman, so if you think that's weird, then you can take a hike. But the things they enjoy the most are making art and cracking jokes, so without further ado, here are your hosts. You've got your two artsy gals, here are your two artsy gals.
Hey everybody, this is Katie.
And this is Sharon.
And welcome to the Two Artsy Gals podcast. Today we are going to talk about clays, because they're awesome and fun, and I like using them for all kinds of stuff. I'm going to have Sharon start off talking about her pottery, because Sharon used to do a lot of pottery, and it was awesome. I want to talk about that kind of clay, and then we'll kind of work into using clay in your mixed media art and the things that we've done with clay. So I'm just going to get started off the bat and ask you to tell me about awesome pottery, Sharon.
Okay, well, gosh, I guess there are so many things about ceramics. There's so many different kinds of clays. It's hard to know where to begin. There's low fire clays, which, as you would guess, fire at a lower temperature.
Okay.
And then there's high fire clays, which obviously, as they sound, fire at a higher temperature. There's porcelains, which are your white delicate clays, and then there's different kinds of stonewares, and there's terracottas, which are usually your low fires. So obviously any of these clays are going to need a kiln or access to a kiln. And then there's also really fun things that you can do with, if you have access to a kiln to get your bisqueware, which is your first firing that you do of your clay, then you can do things like raku. But basically, I mean, where do you start? I guess deciding on what kind of clay you want to use. And you don't have to have any fancy tools or anything like that. You don't even have to have a wheel. You can hand build things.
Thank God, because I'm horrible at the potter's wheel.
Yeah. And do, coil pots, really simple things. There are a lot of places that you can go and fire those. Like in Portland, you can go fire them at Georgie's. So you don't even have to have a kiln. You just have to have access to a kiln. So then you just need to get your things fired with your first firing. So that's called your green, well, let me back up. So then after you make something, let's say a pinch pot or your coil pot or whatever your item is, and you let it air dry, that's called your greenware. So it's dry to the touch. There's no moisture in it. But if you were to put water in it, it's just going to disintegrate.
Okay.
And then your next step would be you would bisque it. So that would be your first firing. So that would be called your bisqueware. And from that point, then you're going to want to decide, what kinds of glazes you're going to put on it. So those are the, a glaze is the pretty paints or glazes that you have on your ceramics. And at that point, we talk a lot about mixed media on our show. Let's say you were making something that wasn't a functional piece, that didn't need to hold water or food. At that point, you could just paint or add whatever you wanted to that bisqueware.
True.
So you wouldn't have to add a glaze if you didn't want to. But your next step traditionally would be to add the glaze. And there's a lot of different ways to get glazes on there. You can dip them in the glazes. You can paint them on. There's even things called raku, where it's basically putting raku glazes onto your bisqueware and then putting them into like kind of a pit. And the bisqueware turns, if there's not glaze on it, turns black. And that's a really fun traditional.
I have a piece that my friend Cindy made for me. That's a little wall plaque that was done with raku, and it's really pretty. I love it.
I love raku. You have to be careful to not burn your eyebrows off, because I saw my professor do that, or get sort of sunburned. But it's a lot of fun. You can do it. You can do it in your backyard in a garbage can.
I think that's what Cindy does. They have a can that they use specifically for that. They do those kind of firings.
Yeah. So there's tons of endless options.
Like pottery doesn't have to be, like you said, functional. It doesn't have to be something that when you're working in ceramics, or it doesn't have to be like a pitcher or a plate or a bowl or a vase. Like people make, that's why I wanted to talk about it, in the context of the show because it is, people make art out of it. And
Mm-hmm.
it is mixed media art. Like the cool plaque that my friend Cindy made for me has all kinds of cool copper wire and beads and stuff on it. I'll have to ask her if I can take a picture of it and post it because it would be worth it just to show people what the raku looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, clay is a great thing to add to your mixed media.
Mm-hmm. You know, and moving on into mixed media, like I've seen, speaking of jewelry, I've seen jewelry that's made out of the, like, traditionally you would think it was ceramics, clay.
Yeah.
But people make jewelry out of it all the time.
Oh yeah, ceramic beads, or I've seen really cool little pendants that have been carved.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they're clay, they're ceramic. Oh, they're so beautiful. And then just have that as a centerpiece in jewelry. Super cool.
Yeah, and I hope people take away from this episode how versatile clay can be and how much it can add to your work.
Mm-hmm.
Because even like moving forward with the thought of beads and stuff, like I'm sure you have, I know everybody I know that grew up with me in the 90s made beads from Sculpey and Fimo clay.
Oh yeah.
Stuff like that. Like it's, you know, and those are polymer clays, if you don't know, which I'm sure everybody does, that you would bake these in your oven. I think I can't remember the temperature. It's a low temperature.
It's pretty low, yeah.
Like 250 or something. I don't know.
I think it is, yeah. I think it's 275 or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, you bake the Sculpey or Fimo. Sculpey, in my experience, is a little bit softer than Fimo clay. So it's
yes, I think so
to
too.
work with, 'cause the
I think so
Fimo,
too.
Jesus, my fingers get sore.
Yeah, it's really hard, but I think once you really work with it, it's good. And I think it's really good if you're making those kind of beads where you make like a loaf.
Yeah, and then you cut them because it stays
Yeah, and you cut them.
harder.
It stays harder. Yeah. Yeah, the
those are
Sculpey's really good if you're like actually sculpting out of it. Like I used to make these clocks, and so I'd like sculpt the whole face of the clock and put all sorts of little figures and animals and stuff. And the Sculpey was a little easier to work with at that.
Yeah, because it stays more pliable.
Mm-hmm.
But and now I don't know as far as Sculpey and Fimo, those are two brands. But do you know of other polymer clays that are available, or? Like, I think those are the biggies, and those are what you always find in the craft stores. But
yeah, I can't think of any
I mean, there
other
must
ones.
be, but who knows? But
Yeah.
they're straightforward. You make, you know, they come in colors already.
Mm-hmm.
So you would, you know, you buy your different colors and you make your beads. I actually have sculpted little elements to mixed media assemblages with that stuff before. Gosh, I've used it to make all kinds of little things for mixed media art pieces. I used it when I made a piece. Gosh, it was so long ago. But I made a barber pole to go in. I made it for my husband's barber shop. It's called Barbershop Solo.
Oh, cool.
And I made the little skeleton, or I made the base to the barber's chair, and I made a barber pole in it that I just used, I think it was Sculpey, and then added those as elements to the mixed media piece after I baked them. So.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
So it's not just for making beads or jewelry.
No. And you can do, like, you can add a lot of things to make them look aged. You can add, you know,
finishes, anything
glitter,
like
finishes.
that.
Yeah, all sorts of stuff to the Sculpey or the Fimo. It's really cool.
Well, and the chair, I'll post a picture of this in the blog too, the chair that I did in that barbershop solo piece, I actually had a photograph that I had taken of his barber chair. And I printed that on tissue paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I just made the shape of the chair underneath and kind of put the grooves and the texture and the shape and the lines of the chair in it with a little clay working tool. But then after I baked it, I glued, like I used, what did I use? Mod Podge, and glued it down on top of the clay. So it was the image, like this ghostly image of it, but then I used the clay to bump up the texture.
Cool.
So it kind of stands out from the canvas that I put it on. So,
yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
So you can use that for, you're not just isolated to jewelry or to anything else with that. I know a lot of people that actually use Sculpey in sculpting dolls, art dolls, and stuff like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
They sculpt the faces out of it.
Creepy.
And stuff. Yeah, creepy. I don't like dolls
Yeah,
very
dolls.
much, so.
Yeah.
But, and I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, can you bake Sculpey and Fimo in a toaster oven as well?
I think you can, because I've done a lot of crafts in toaster ovens before.
Yeah,
I think
know.
you
I'm
can. I think
looking
I've
for a
actually.
toaster oven for my studio, so.
I think I have done it in a toaster oven.
And sometimes I think it's easier to watch that way because you have the little window.
Yeah,
have
and
you
if you're
ever
working
burnt
small,
your Fimo clay or Sculpey?
yeah, it's kind of stinky.
I've burned it. It smells bad. I mean, it still works, but it's,
Yeah.
you know, unless you have burned it so bad that it looks like shit, because I've done that.
Yeah.
I've forgotten about beads. Just left them in there and then got, hey, what the hell is that smell? It's kind of like the last batch of cookies. When you were making cookies, you totally space it off and burn them. I do that with beads,
because you're munching on the other cookies.
Yeah, well, because your brain just goes, okay, I'm done. I'll put the last one in. And then you're like, oh, shit, I totally forgot about it. But yeah, so those are both clays that you would have to cure with heat. And in my artwork, I use a lot of epoxy resin clays.
Now, what is it? Could you talk a lot about? Well, I guess that's what you're going to talk about right now.
It's a 2-part clay, so it's a chemical process that cures it. So you mix equal parts of part A and part B, and you knead it until it's smooth. And it can be a little bit hard sometimes, and then you have actually a pretty limited window of time to work with it because it's an air dry clay. And the thing that's awesome about it is it never shrinks, it never cracks. And it air dries, so you just let it set and air dry. So even after it's gotten, there's a point, you can feel when it's getting to the point where you're not going to be able to work with it anymore. But you can still go in and, you can sand it, you can scrape it until it's completely 100% dry. You can go in and do little details and stuff to it. And actually, sometimes I let it set up for a while before I do. Sometimes I'll scrape texture into it and stuff. I want it to be a little bit harder when I do that. So I've used a few different types of the resin clay. When I started doing work, and the ones that I buy are made by a company called Aves, and I'll put a link up. They have a bazillion different kinds of clay that you can look at or use on their website. But I started using a product called Fix It, which is it works awesome for repairs around the house too. And I still use it for sometimes like fixing, adhering things to canvas or odd stuff. Like if you have something smooth and you want to glue a piece of glass to a piece of wood or something. That's a weird example, but it stays. Like if you fix it down with that, it's done. It's not coming off ever. And it's waterproof. It actually sets up in water. So the disadvantage of, I think, epoxy resin clays is that once it dries, it's permanent.
And so it's harder than a Sculpey or a...
It is, but it's also, once you start working with it, it becomes pliable. I make a lot of molds. Like when I did my skull cameos, I made a master skull cameo, and then I made a mold of it. And then I use that mold and I push the clay into it so that I don't have to sculpt each one by hand.
Right.
So you can make molds of it.
And I mean, when it dries, it's harder than Sculpey or...
Oh, yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Yes. It's rock hard almost.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I had personally started getting an allergic reaction to the Fix-It that I used all the time. So it's a chemical reaction that makes it happen. They say it's non-toxic, but because it is a heat-based chemical reaction when you mix the part A and part B together, and I have a really sensitive skin, so you should wear gloves when you use it. And I don't always use gloves because I don't know about you, but sometimes I like to feel what I'm doing.
Right.
So sometimes it's not conducive to a good workflow when you have gloves on. I contacted them, the company that makes it, and they were super awesome and said, hey, that happens. We've heard of it happening. Why don't you try this product? So now what I use is it's just their straight up epoxy resin clay. It has less epoxy in it. And I have not so far. It's almost feels the exact same as Fix It. But I've not had an allergic reaction to it yet.
Oh,
So
that's good.
it's really great. Now, one of the things when you work with it, you probably need to I use olive oil, or you can use lotion. You want to oil up your tools in your hands because it does tend to get a little bit sticky.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
But I love it. It's very versatile. It can be used for a lot of things. And actually, I have a friend who wrote a book about using epoxy resin clays. It's called Inspired Remnants, Curious Dreams, Mixed Media Projects in Epoxy Clay.
It's a great book.
It gives it talks a lot about how to use it and the different products you can use with it and how to use them. But it also gives you some project ideas if you're just starting out and you kind of want to learn how to do it. It should have some pretty cool guidance. So, but I do like that. And I'm actually getting ready to start experimenting with another clay that Aves makes that is, it's a commercial, what is it called when you dip shit in the... I'm sorry, I'm going to cut this part out. What is that shit called when you tear up paper and you put it in the dough? Or the flour and water and then you...
paper mache?
Okay. So it's a commercial paper mache mix. It's like a powder that you mix up with water. But you also have the option of mixing less water and using it as a clay.
Oh, awesome.
So I'm going to be experimenting with that, but it's also an air dry clay that does not shrink. So I'm going to be using that because the epoxy resin clays can be a little bit heavy, and that's one thing you have to keep in mind when you're working in when you're like trying to put stuff on canvas, or if you're doing mixed media assemblage, which is what I use it for, and you're sculpting with it.
It's just like hanging off your like pulling your canvas or something.
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to keep the weight down, it might not be the best product to use for something like that. But I mean, I'm not saying it's like, it's not going to weigh 10 pounds or anything like that. But,
but yeah.
It gets a little bit awkward sometimes. So I am going to try. Plus, if you're using something, you have to keep in mind when you're making art that's meant to hang on a wall, you don't want it to be like too heavy. Like, you don't want it to fall off of people's walls, or you want people to not have to use special industrial strength shit to get things to stick to their wall. Right. So I'm going to be experimenting with this new clay that they have. But yeah, I really like the air dry clays. I think they're pretty convenient. And then you don't have to turn on the oven. You don't have to. I really like that a lot.
Would this be a good time? You wanted to talk about a clay experiment that you tried with some lint clay?
Yeah, so, I wanted to talk a little bit about homemade clays, because there are a lot of really cool recipes on the internet you can look up and find. I don't know, you can find just plain old, like, flour dough clays that are air dry, which are kind of cool. I know if you've had a kid, I know you have kids, I made a ton of homemade Play-Doh.
Oh, yeah.
When my kid was little, and I always used...
Love it.
I used Kool-Aid packets to color it, and it smells good. Yeah, you get all kinds of cool colors, and then it smells awesome, although when the little ones will eat it. Which is kind of funny, actually, because it's just salt and flour, so you watch them make the caca. But yeah, I use that. But I did also find a recipe for lint clays, and in an effort to lighten things up, my workup, I was going to experiment with it a little bit. Super gross. Like, the people who make that must be bald and have no pets. Because dryer lint has hair in it. And so you let this dryer lint, you mix it up in a blender in water, and then it's kind of like mud. It's weird, but you're using the dryer lint to make the clay. I don't exactly remember the recipe, but what I did find is that it had all this, like, my hair in it, especially because my hair is a little bit longer than my husband or my son's, and my dog doesn't shed, but he has people hair. So his hair, like, because he's part poodle, so his hair, it had his hair, anything that you get on your clothes, and my husband is a barber. So he gets hair slivers all over himself from, like, I call them people crumbs. They're super gross. It's like he just is covered in hair when he comes home. And so you have there are little slivers and gross bits of hair. because that is what happens when you dry your clothes. The lint that comes off your clothes often contains hair and stuff like that. So I don't recommend trying that clay because it was awful. Like,
that's
nasty.
And
you couldn't work with it because it had all these hairs like stringing it together. And frankly, it was like, the texture of it was kind of like picking up a fucking hairball that a cat gacked up on the floor and trying to sculpt something out of it. And it just made me, I almost puked. I was like, ew, I don't like this stuff. And I threw it away. So.
Oh, that is nasty.
It was super gross. But there are other, like, experiment with it. There are other cool recipes that you can find for clays and doughs that you can work with that are air dry or that you bake. So, but I would just encourage people to really experiment a little bit and try to get some clays into their work.
Yeah. Yeah,
they're really fun to work with.
Yeah, tons of stuff that, just like you said, look up on the internet the different recipes. Some may work, some may not.
Some are totes gross, man. Super gross. But, I don't know, though. It's kind of like that. What's that one website? Have you seen it? It's called Regretsy.
Oh my God.
So that's kind of what my life was like when I tried that clay, because I was looking at the picture of the person I think I found it on Pinterest or something.
There's also, like Pinterest fails.
Yes.
Like,
it was a major Pinterest fail. I'm like, what the fuck is this stuff? Like, gross. It looks nothing like what the person was doing.
I love those. They're awesome.
It kind of cracks me up. Not just kind of. It really cracks me up.
So. Oh, yeah. The cooking ones are pretty hilarious.
Yeah, they are. So, yeah. Clay is awesome and fun, and I hope you start introducing some into your mixed media artwork. One thing to keep in mind, though, we always talk about safety here on the Two Artsy Gals podcast. And, when you're using ceramics clays and you're in with your kilns, heat, sometimes I'm assuming the glazes are probably not exactly non-toxic sometimes, or...
Yeah, when you're mixing glazes with dry ingredients, use a face mask or a respirator. Yeah. We've talked about that on our safety episode.
Yeah, and polymer clays, I think they're relatively safe, again, but they're not something that you're using in an oven, and hot beads will fucking burn you when you take them out of the oven. So make sure you're careful with that. And the epoxy resin clays, you'll want to wear gloves probably, and it's good to have a barrier, like I said, of moisture. So like use an oil or a lotion on your hands so that you're not absorbing it. And when you sand because I was going to say you can sand all those epoxy resin clays, but you're going to want to use a respirator and eye protection when you sand them, just to make sure that you don't
right.
Shit.
Like absolutely. Just be smart, people.
Yeah.
And talking about protection.
Oh, for shit's sake.
Let's talk about what Katie glued herself to this week with some, what was it, Gorilla Glue?
Well, Gorilla makes super glue now.
Yeah, and so her husband actually, because he likes comedy, bought it for her. Well, and she glued a fucking gnome to her thumb. Folks, she glued
a talking gnome.
A talking gnome to her thumb.
And did you see where my thumb got glued? It looks like it's up his butt.
Yes. And there's a picture that I would like you to put on our page, because now it's the picture when Katie calls me or texts me that I see. Because then, correct me if I'm wrong, you tried to get it off with some paper towels. And then you glued yourself to the paper towels, and when she sent me the picture, it looked like a maxi pad was glued to her finger. It was like... The accident was like a glue Rube Goldberg disaster.
It kind of was.
Because everything that she touched kept getting stuck to her.
And my husband just stood taking pictures.
A gnome.
Well, and the bad part is that it's a talking garden gnome. I love my gnome, and his legs got broken off. And I sincerely suspect that my son kicked him, because my son fucking hates that gnome. He's right outside my door, and he has a bunch of different phrases that he says. It's the Travelocity gnome. And he's right outside my door, and my son hates that he talks, and I think he kicked him. And he fell down and his legs broke off. So that's why I got the Gorilla Glue, super glue stuff to glue his legs back on. And the struggle to get him off of me, I turned the switch on and he said, what the fuck did he say? One of his phrases, he's like,
hold on, I have it. I have it.
No, wait, he's all, it's amazing the places you can go without ever moving. It is no voice. And I'm like, fuck you. I'm not moving because I'm stuck to you. Shut up. And my husband just stood there with the camera. He got my own phone, said, where's your phone? And took pictures of me instead of helping me.
Well, you know.
And honestly,
he got you the glue.
People,
so
you
that
have to know, I really try to be safe. I really, really, really try. I try.
You know, it's like that saying, like, anything but the kitchen sink or whatever that phrase is, but I think Katie probably has glued herself to the kitchen sink. She has glued herself to the kitchen stove and a gnome. A gnome.
So, Sharon's been harassing me about this, and I think I said I was going to do it before, but now I have to. I will be posting, I'm going to add a page to our blog that is a list of shit I've glued myself to. With pictures. Because I have pictures of most of it, because, you know, my husband thinks he's hilarious, so.
I'm glad that Kurt's around most of the time when you get glued to yourself. Not to help you, but so he can take pictures.
That's not very nice. It's awful. And then, you know what? I fixed like 2 other broken things before I glued myself to the gnome, and it had no problems. I put a ring back on a fucking fairy.
I think you're lying.
I'm not! I swear I'll show you the picture of the goddamn fairy. This is what happens. I start thinking, I get cocky, and I'm like, I haven't glued myself to anything. This is fucking rad.
Let's keep going and just...
That's exactly what I do. And then I get to this point, and I'm like, oh, I tempt fate, and then I'm glued to something. It's awful. My cat, I wish I had my camera now. She's sitting in my office looking at me like, no. I make sure the animals aren't in the room when I use it, because I could do that.
That's good. You could.
I do, 4th of July, I'm going to tell a quick story about gluing yourself to shit. My niece, my 14-year-old niece, made fun of me because our tradition for 4th of July is that we go over the border to Washington. I shouldn't be saying this. We get illegal fireworks from Washington. Because you can't get good firecrackers in Oregon anymore.
No, you can't.
So
that's why I moved to Washington.
And then when you go camping, in Washington you can smoke pot while you're playing with fireworks. The good fireworks
and have a gay marriage.
And blow shit up and get married and smoke some pot. But hey, we're voting on that in Oregon in November. Just an FYI. So we get firecrackers, though, and electrical tape, and we go to the dollar store and we buy a bunch of cheap plastic toys, and then we have my husband is in charge of this, and he sets it up, and all the kids spend the afternoon electrical taping firecrackers to all of these toys, and then we take them out into the street, and we blow them all up. But this year, for some reason, my husband decided that he was going to get super glue to glue the fireworks to the toys.
Because he secretly wanted to see if you would glue yourself to it.
Well, my niece said, Aunt Katie, you have got to stay away from this table. Like, don't come over here. You know you're going to glue yourself to something. Just stay away. All her smart mouth yapping, I'm posting this picture. She was walking around, feeling all sassy. We were eating dinner before the fireworks display, and I looked at her, and she looked at me. She glued a fucking firecracker, a ladyfinger, to her leg.
She is related to you.
She totally is. And I said, you made fun of me. Look at your leg. And she's like, you would have blown yourself up if you'd have glued it to yourself. So whatever. And she walks away. Which is probably true. So.
That's awesome.
Oh my God. I'm going to go hang my head in shame now. So, listeners, use some clay. It's fun. Do not glue yourself to shit. Use me as a warning. Just don't do it. And if you would like to get a hold of us to tell me what a dumbass I am for gluing myself to shit, or if you know of any kinds of clay that we didn't talk about, or you want to share your experience with working with clay, or if you just want to tell us that you like our show and that we're cool, or anything else, you can email us at 2rcgals@gmail.com. And of course, as always, I will have pictures and show notes up on our blog after this episode, and that address is, what is our blog? Oh, 2artsygals.wordpress.com. I totally brain farted for a second. So, and then of course you can always subscribe to our podcast through Stitcher and use the Stitcher app, or through iTunes and use the iTunes app. Super easy. It's all free, so you should totally do it. And also you should leave us some really awesome feedback and ratings on those sites so that we get bumped up in the ratings.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Is that anything? Anything else you have to add? Are we done?
I don't think so.
I think we're done too. We're both doing these really dumb cheerleader arms for some reason right now. I have no idea what that... We're like Muppets. But anyway, yeah. What is our thing that we say again? Oh yeah,
Say have a great week and go make some shit.
Go make some cool shit, yo! Have a great week. Bye!
Bye!